Welcome back to Total Tactics Football. It's Fran here, and I'll be recapping a video on how to kind of create a limitless or wildcard team for the round of 8 stages. I think at this point in the tournament, having a limitless and wildcard is extremely strong if you didn't already use it so far, and it's the best point right now to actually use one of those chips if you have one or two remaining. And I think if you have two remaining, you would go limitless this week and then followed by a wild card next week. If you have only a wild card, probably just use it this week, because I think this is the week where you have the most opportunity to kind of fix your problems, and you won't have that security blanket right now, given the fact that you only have 3 free transfers. So for that reason, I think it makes sense to wildcard now if that's the only chip you have left. Now, I'm going to go through a kind of prospective team that I've created, and then I'm also going to, as usual, kind of run you through our kind of spreadsheet on why and what picks we think are the best in terms of the ordering of forwards, midfielders, defenders, and then goalkeepers. So I think the place I'd like to start off with first are the forwards. I think it's worth actually looking for, in terms of forwards, kind of understanding that it doesn't really matter whether you have forwards on day one or day two. However, if you have a forward on day one, playing on day one, you have the opportunity to kind of sub them out in day two. Now, of course, I think there are kind of four clear picks here that are perhaps better than most. And I think those are Morata, Lukaku, Patrick Schick, and Harry Kane. I think to start with Alvaro Morata, simply put, he has been one of the leading kind of players in Spain in terms of being given chances by the rest of his team. And I think we've seen a slight pickup in his form in terms of him potentially having a bit more confidence with scoring that kind of wonderful goal in extra time versus Croatia. And then on top of that, simply, I think Spain builds so many chances that you can expect Morata to have, a strong return, I think, on every match day, to be honest. And I think it doesn't make sense to not go Morata now, especially since we can see that I think Spain is starting to output a lot of goals now that they've actually found a little bit of form. And one thing that we actually talked about early on in the tournament was that Spain was practicing, without the full team due to the COVID restrictions that they're kind of facing. And I think we've seen only that the Spain side has improved in terms of the chance creation, not necessarily defensively. Let's move on to Lukaku. I think Lukaku is always going to be a best pick simply because of what he represents on the international stage for Belgium, and simply put, the kind of arsenal behind him. I think there's a lot of creative force in Belgium. Of course, Kevin De Bruyne is a key asset to kind of unlocking Lukaku as well, and I think that might dampen whether or not you think Lukaku is a good pick. I think Lukaku is probably the fourth in terms of priority when compared to the other two players in day two. But Lukaku does bring a lot of assets that I think is very strong versus this Italian team. And you can see it because I think Arnautovic had a fantastic game versus the Italians. And I expect Lukaku very much to have a similar kind of impact in terms of aerial dominance, and then also being able to play from his back to goal and be able to create chances like so, whether it's assisting or whether it's be able to turn on the dime and kind of shoot on his own like he did versus Finland. In terms of day two, I think, as I said, Schick and Kane are the better picks. I think with Denmark, you have the opportunity of Dolberg with a fantastic game last game, but they still have other forwards to kind of mix the load with, and you don't really know for sure who's the talismanic player. Whereas you do know that is the case with Patrick Schick and Czech Republic, and for that reason, I think if you look at Schick's kind of abilities, I think first of all he can carry the ball tremendously far, and he has a lot of great physical attributes that a lot of, I think, classic center forwards possess, but he has that kind of talismanic appeal, I think, to this Czech Republic side, and he is really on the end of most of their goals. In terms of Kane, I think he's finally found a little bit of uptick in form, and I think it's the perfect kind of stage in the tournament, given England's bracket, to kind of pick him and to go for him, whether you're a wild card or limitless, because I think this Ukraine team have just been run down very hard, and it's a great opportunity for Kane to actually have a strong performance. And I think we saw the opportunity, I think, for Ukraine to be exploited, I think, by, stronger center forwards. And I do think Kane has a strong potential to really be perhaps, to score a brace this week. And I think for that reason, there's not going to be a differential from the Ukraine side. I don't really see Yaremchuk doing much versus this England defense. I think they're very elite. I think the differentials are clearly Seferovic due to his aerial threat. And we saw that kind of versus France. And I think he's picked up a little bit of form in the tournament from initially missing in the Wales game to kind of finding a little bit more strength in terms of his game versus Turkey and then building on that with France. And I think Spain do have a weakness, as I said, with their aerial ability across the center back pairing. And so he might be a great option there. Um, I also now prefer his positioning compared to Embolo. I think Embolo is very strong versus defenders and in a much more open game, but I still think Spain play in a rather organized manner, which means that Seferovic is probably going to have dividends. Ciro Immobile, I think we all know his assets. I think one thing I would say is that he's been kind of pushed very far outside of the box lately, and he's been reduced to kind of shooting long. And I think that might still be the case when they play Belgium. And I think he might have a potential for an assist, but not necessarily to kind of pop off with goals. And I've already discussed Dolberg. So for me, I would definitely go Schick, Morata, and Kane, due to the fact that Schick kind of gives you that kind of budget flexibility if you're on a wild card. But if you're on a limitless, then definitely you can think about Lukaku, right? Now let's move on to the midfielders. I think the midfielders here is a situation where you kind of have a large pool of players and they're all fantastic to pick from. I think the danger with Spain is simply put just the kind of possibility that Luis Enrique can rotate the players. And I think there was a clear reason why he picked Ferran Torres. It was to abuse the lack of pace, I think, in the Croatian defense. He might not think that's the same with the Swiss defense because, we know that Ricardo Rodriguez and Mbabu as example fullbacks are very fast players. And perhaps he might think that Sarabia and Olmo might be a better partnership or an alternative with, let's say, Moreno perhaps playing on the wings, as we've seen in one of the games. But I think Pablo Sarabia is another fine and fantastic option there. He's probably one of the players who is kind of more positionally aware within the side, Ferran Torres being the more clinical of all the wingers. And Dani Olmo kind of similar to Sarabia in that he perhaps plays a little bit more traditionally as a winger, but has that kind of ability to create chances for the team and be in the right place in the right time from deeper. So I prefer Ferran Torres and Sarabia and Olmo in that order. I think you don't want to go for more than two Spanish midfielders. It's of course a gamble, but it's one that I think that's always worth taking now that we've seen that the Spain side can score a lot of goals. And I think as long as you can get one of the midfielders who kind of provide a lot to the Spanish side, if they score big, then that's your kind of midfield points settled. And I think in terms of the Belgium-Italy game, there's a lot of interest, I think, in terms of the players who have stepped up and kind of shown a little bit more in the tournament compared to when they were coming in. I think coming in, we all expected Berardi to be a fantastic budget pick, but I think Chiesa has shown that he might have proven himself enough to kind of be a starting player. Now, Mancini might be a bit stubborn and continue to use Berardi, so I think perhaps proceed with a little bit of caution with Chiesa. But I think, therefore, Thorgan Hazard and Lorenzo Insigne are the best midfield picks there. Insigne, of course, is a bit of a budgetary restraint, but simply put, he plays as a second inside forward and he has a lot of opportunities to shoot, I think, especially versus a Belgian defense that is rather slow, and his kind of pacing behind will be key for the team. In terms of Thorgan Hazard, I think you actually have a player here who has grown in force in the tournament. He's provided assists, he's provided goals as well for the team. And I think a lot of teams are struggling to deal with the kind of interrelationship of the left inside forward and the left winger, which is the left wing back, really, which is Thorgan Hazard. And I think he's starting to exploit that space and kind of abuse it versus his defensive counterparts. And they find it very hard to kind of switch, zonally to kind of defend his inward movements. And I think that makes him very interesting versus any team. Then moving forward, I think in day two, we have Damsgaard, and I think he's only grown in the tournament. And Denmark have really kind of benefited him by moving into this five-back structure where we see so much more offensive contribution with Mela. And his kind of partnership with Mela is also kind of exacerbating like his ability to play and his ability to create. And I think for that reason, Damsgaard is a fantastic pick. Højbjerg, of course, is just, I think, more of a budgetary kind of pick. You would pick him if you kind of need him to plug a hole in your team. But I think, the last premium pick that we have for day two for midfielders is Raheem Sterling. And Sterling, of course, as we know, has been class all tournament long for England. He's scored the bulk of their goals. And you can see that he's quintessential to even their build-up right now. and I think he is just an undisputed starter right now. And I think what makes Jack Grealish interesting differential alongside Sterling is the fact that we saw him play very well within the same structure and shape that Gareth Southgate wanted to play. You know, they stuck within a five back, and Grealish was able to play very effectively as a substitute to Saka. And I think that makes him interesting too versus a rather open attacking Ukraine side. And perhaps it might be the case that England play back three themselves as well. But we've also seen, you know, good returns from Jack Grealish when he actually played and featured when in a 4-2-3-1 shape. So I think Grealish is an interesting option no matter the formation, even though he might just come on for a substitute appearance. Now let's move on to the defenders. Or rather, actually, let's just show you the midfield team that we have so far. I've picked Sterling. I think he's a priority for sure. I think Sarabia and Torres are always a great pairing. I really like Kays and I really like Damsgaard for those kind of prices as well. Uh, and so for that reason, I think this actually might be the best five possible out of the full list. Perhaps Thorgan Hazard belongs in that conversation as well, but I think those are the priority picks that I would personally go for. Um, Moving on, I think let's have a look at the defenders. Cesar Azpilicueta, of course, and Laporte, I think, are those kind of Spanish defenders who I now think are starting to be nailed on. We saw Gaia actually play in place of Alba, which makes me kind of scared about the rotation risk. Of course, Gaia got injured, but I feel like we've reached a point where um, it still might be the case that Alba plays or Gaia plays, and I think we don't know the extent of Gaia's injury, so it's not really worth touching on that. I think what Azpilicueta brings is someone who's nailed on and even scored a goal the other day. I think he actually has provided a lot more key passes than people would have expected, given the fact that he's kind of known as a more defensive player or even as a centre back. And with Laporte, it's the same thing too. His ball carries have been quintessential to the way Spain build up their play, and I think he is that kind of defender who could even drop a potential assist. And we've also seen a goal from him as well. And I think he's the defender out of that kind of three centre backs that Luis Enrique has been using, who has to play the full 90 minutes for that side, or extra time as well, as we saw. But I still think the defensive picks in day one are better within Spinazzola and Meunier. These are both fullbacks who attack very highly for their teams and they play more offensively than I think most. Meunier becomes that kind of right winger. Spinazzola becomes a left winger as Insigne moves into a left inside forward position. And these two players have been attacking. So if we look at Spinazzola, for example, like zonally, we can see he clearly is quintessential to the way Italy build up their attacks and also carry the ball forward. And he also has the kind of added dimension of being able to cross the ball, as we saw with the case, a kind of goal versus Austria. And with Meunier, we have a similar dividend. I wouldn't say Meunier's kind of crosses are as good as Spinazzola's, but I think the fact that he kind of occupies that zonal position and has the opportunity to cut back to some of his teammates who are very great finishers and scorers means that Meunier always has a chance to do very well. And I think Belgium versus Italy could be a game where simply one side might just win 1-0 or 2-0. I don't really expect it to be a high goal scoring affair. So I think having both defenders is a good punt in the sense that you can get one of these defenders with an elite return on them. If we move to day two, then of course the elite defenders I think are similar in the sense that we're looking again at the fullbacks who have performed all tournament long. And I think the two that we can easily pick are Mela from Denmark, who's going to play Czech versus Czech Republic, and then Luke Shaw. I think Luke Shaw probably is the most interesting one here because Ukraine do play quite an offensive style of football. They do leave, I think, gaps spatially because they do press quite hard, I think, from the middle of the field, not necessarily at the front. And I think that kind of space can let Luke Shaw kind of run in behind potentially. And, you know, we've seen, for example, the Austrian side and also the Dutch side kind of exploit um, this Ukrainian defense, and I can see much the same happening with England. To be honest, I think the save picks become then the centre back pairing of England, and the differential becomes Sufal, who is a set piece taker for the Czech Republic as well, and someone who can actually provide an assist and potentially a clean sheet, given the fact that we've seen the Czech Republic has defended very well versus an offensive three back formation from the Netherlands. So if we actually look at my defenders, I picked Shaw, Spinazzola, and Meunier. And then I've also filled out with Stones because I don't have Pickford in this team. Now, if you don't want to have Stones, I think you can get, and you have a limitless, for example, you could go for someone like Pickford instead of Schmeichel, and then perhaps replace Stones with someone else on the list. Someone that you prefer a little bit better, perhaps. But I actually do like trusting in the English defense, and I think it makes sense. But if we go to the keepers, just to round it all off, I think so. The issue you have is that you need to have a keeper from day one, and then you need to have a keeper from day two. Most people are going to be carrying Donnarumma, but you have the option here of a wild card, and perhaps Unai Simon makes the most sense because Spain probably have the easier game, so you kind of have a guarantee in a sense that they'll move on to the next stage. And I think, whilst I said that, I think you know Belgium and Italy could be a clean sheet for either side. It's hard to decide which team that'll actually kind of befall to, right? So I think it's better to go with a safer option potentially in Unai Simon, despite the fact that we just saw Spain concede three. Um, but I think there's more potential there in terms of budgeting as well. If you have a wild card and if you have limitless, I still think it makes sense this week to go Unai Simon because I actually still think he has better potential for a clean sheet because I can't really decide between Belgium and Italy right now. In day two, I think Jordan Pickford is clearly the better option. But of course, price wise, Schmeichel becomes a very interesting pick. And I think for that reason, they're both the best picks there. And you have to kind of decide for yourself. Jordan Pickford, of course, being priority. Now, if you look at my team, of course, this is a wildcard team with a 105 million budget. And for that reason, I have Schmeichel and Simone. But of course, if you don't have a budget and you're limitless, then yeah, please go for it and go for Pickford and Unai Simon. Well, anyways, that's it for the kind of team selection video. The idea here is to kind of provide a wildcard basis team with the standard stock standard like 105 million. I think if you want to go for alternate options, please feel free to kind of comment below, and I'll answer your question as soon as possible. But also remember to kind of refer to all the picks that I've kind of gone through here in terms of day one and day two, and pick a team if you want comprised of these players. If you have any kind of additional picks that you think I've missed out, comment them below and we can discuss them too. Otherwise, have a wonderful week. I hope you guys have a successful kind of usage of your chip, and I'll see you guys in the next week.